cada vez que te pienso.
Lupin is a 5-part Netflix original series about a smooth, intelligent career criminal by the name of Hassan Diop. Now, when Hassan was a teenager, he was given a book by his father about a master of disguise or gentleman thief by the name of Arsène Lupin. And that's where the series gets its name. And so throughout the series, we see Diop model his professional career, as it were, and to some extent his life around the antics of Arsène Lupin, and we see him pull a number of tricks from Lupin's bag of tricks. Now, the very first trick that is played in this series is actually on the audience. We see Diop preparing to carry out a heist to steal an expensive necklace, and so in our minds we think that this series will be, in episode after episode, about him doing various heists and cons and stealing from people. But there is a far deeper story that is at play in this series. Everything we see Hassan do is motivated by a desire to solve the mystery around the death of his father. When he was still a teenager, his father was accused of stealing a necklace. This necklace is actually the object of interest in a heist, the same heist that Hassan plans. And many years ago, Babacar Diop, Hassan's father, was framed for the theft of this necklace. And so what Hassan is actually trying to do is get to the bottom of what happened to his father. That is really what is at the heart of this series. As I do with every review, let me talk about the things that I enjoyed in this series and the things that I didn't really fancy so much. Let's start with the positives. I quite enjoyed the use of flashbacks. Flashbacks can be fairly tricky territory. When they're done well, they serve to give context to a story. They serve to add a layer of meaning and richness to a story. But conversely, when they are badly used, they can be really cringy and cheesy. I'm sure you've all watched a series or a movie where there's an unnecessary flashback where you're given information that could have been delivered to you in some other way. Well, in this series, I thought the use of flashbacks was actually useful. It was, I think, necessary and appropriate to show us some of the things that Hassan does in the present. At times, yes, there were a little too many flashbacks in one episode, but those that worked, I think, worked really well. Another thing that I enjoyed was the main character himself, the actor who portrays Diop. He is played, of course, by Omar Sy. And Omar Sy, when you look at him, he's quite a physically imposing character. He's quite tall, quite big and well built. And yet, from an emotional point of view, he has the range that you need for someone who needs to be both quite charming and slick, but also, on the other hand, has to be quite brutal in order to deal with some of his enemies and his antagonists in the show. And so I think the choice of Omar Sy as the lead character in this was really good. I also like the dimension of having him as a Senegalese immigrant to France. I thought that was just another added layer of richness to the story. Let's talk now about some of the things that I didn't like so much. At times I felt Hassan was a little too slick. He is of course meant to be slick. That's kind of his whole nature as a character, but at times he's put in situations that are so unrealistic that his slickness ends up being beyond belief. To give you an example, there is a point in the story where he needs to see someone who is in prison, but to do so, he can't just go in as a visitor. He actually has to become part of the prison population. And so he goes to visiting time and he devises a plan with this guy to say, let's just switch places, nobody's gonna notice. And quite literally, that's what happens. The guard doesn't notice that the guy who was a visitor moments ago is now part of the prison population. And to me, that just didn't sit right. It felt like it was a way of advancing the character's story, but in a way that wasn't really plausible. And so I had a bit of a problem with that. Another thing that I struggled with was the police characters in the series. I felt they were very flat. Other than being there to show us that a crime has been committed and we have to pursue this criminal, but we don't know who he is, and so let's build a case. They weren't very interesting characters at all. They were always having to be left behind in Diop's dust, but there was no real dimension to them. They ended up for me being fairly uninteresting to watch. And so I thought the police characters, not the actors, but the police characters were a fairly low point in the series. I felt they could have been given a little more depth in order to become more interesting. So in a sense, I guess the things I didn't like were to do with the shortage, as it were, of obstacles and roadblocks for Hassan to realistically overcome. I hope there will be redemption for this, in the sense that this was a part one. These first 5 episodes were a part one of this series. There is a part 2 on the way. It's not streaming yet, but it should come sometime. When it does, I will be there to watch it and review. But hopefully some of these aspects will be redeemed, where we see Hassan hopefully meet with his main antagonist, and where we see the people that have been pursuing him face to face with him and really deal with each other in a more realistic and interesting way. However, I enjoyed the series. I think if you are into criminal masterminds and heists, you will definitely enjoy this show. If you've watched it already, please share your comments in the section below. I'd love to hear from you. If you haven't watched it, give it a watch and let me know what you think about it, and if you think it's worth watching. If you would recommend it to anybody else. If you're enjoying the content on this channel, please consider subscribing. If you enjoyed this video in particular, please let me know by giving it a like. Otherwise, from me, Tafadzwa, this was my review of Lupin. Thank you so much for watching, and take care.